We spend so much of our lives drawn to stories, to the epic scope of gods warring on colossal battlefields. We are captivated by tales of heroes battling monsters, or empires rising and falling in spectacular grandeur. These myths provide us with meaning. They give shape to chaos, explaining why lightning strikes or how love begins. They are the foundational narratives upon which civilization is built. We read them as truth. We often mistake spectacle for substance, mistaking action for wisdom. The mythology of man has always been a grand performance, full of dramatic arcs, divine intervention, and glorious tragedy. It speaks to us of power, the raw, overwhelming force that defines existence. And in the heart of these tales, we are often merely spectators, marveling at the lives of gods or legendary figures who seemed untouchable, destined by fate itself. But there is a quieter voice, a skeptical echo that grows louder among those who seek something deeper than mere narrative flourish. That quiet voice begins to whisper that what we have accumulated in these vast tales, the battles won, the prophecies fulfilled, the mighty deeds accomplished, is often incomplete. It paints a picture of power exercised externally, but it rarely asks us where all that energy must ultimately reside, within ourselves. The philosopher, standing apart from the dazzling glow of mythic glory, points not to faraway kingdoms or celestial wars, but to the small space between thoughts. He suggests that these great, sweeping narratives, while beautiful and potent, sometimes function more as a grand distraction than an accurate map for living. They teach us how gods behave, but perhaps fail to guide us on how a single person must navigate a difficult Tuesday afternoon. Consider the hero. His fate is generally predetermined. He has destiny handed down from Olympus or written into the stars. His triumphs are often matters of divine grace, and his falls are inevitable cosmic consequences. Our natural impulse is to seek such certainty, to find a cosmic plan that dictates whether we succeed or fail, if we will live long or perish young. It is comforting, this notion of predetermined purpose. We hand our anxieties over to the vast machinery of fate, believing that if only we understand the pattern, we can feel safe, even if we cannot change the outcome. The philosophy challenges this deeply ingrained comfort. It does not dismiss fate. Rather, it refines its definition. It suggests that destiny is less about a written script and more about the relentless accumulation of choices made in response to what happens to us. We are constantly confronted with events we do not choose. The plague, the loss of wealth, the betrayals of friends. These external forces hit us like inevitable lightning bolts. They strike at our comfortable narratives and shake the pillars of our self-understanding. When the storm hits, when the job is lost, or the relationship dissolves, the mythic mind demands an explanation. Was it a divine curse? Did I offend some jealous god? What cosmic balance has been upset? The myth seeks an external culprit, a foe to blame, a betrayal by fate itself. The philosophical mind, however, quietly redirects its gaze. It asks a different, perhaps more unsettling question. Does the event itself determine our suffering, or does the story we tell ourselves about that event determine it? Is the tragedy inherent in the fall, or is the tragedy manufactured by the judgment we attach to the fall? This shift is monumental. It requires us to pull the reins of our own emotional narratives from the mighty hands of prophecy and cosmic decree. We are asked not simply to observe what happens, the loss, the wound, the setback, but to fundamentally scrutinize our very agreement with it. It brings a profound weight upon us. To become self-sufficient in making meaning is an intensely isolating task. In myth, suffering has transcendent meaning. It elevates you to martyr or hero. But philosophy sometimes strips that grandeur away, leaving you alone with the stark reality of your own processing capacity. The riddle posed by wisdom is simple, yet deeply difficult. Are we merely puppets dancing on threads spun by fate, or do we retain a sovereign power in the space of our ascent? This sovereignty belongs to how we choose to respond. To realize this requires an unbearable degree of intellectual humility. It demands that we admit that we are not always right, and that the comfort of a ready-made narrative, a perfect explanation from Olympus or history books, is often just sugar coating for unavoidable discomfort. We must learn to live in the gray area, where certainty is replaced by reasoned possibility, to accept responsibility for our emotional terrain. The journey thus becomes one of constant reorientation. The myths teach us what we ought to fear and how great it is to conquer. Philosophy teaches us something perhaps more uncomfortable, that true victory is not over an external foe, but over the internal tendency toward panic. It whispers that the deepest conflict is waged right here, in the echo chamber of our own minds. We learn to slow down, to notice the meticulous details, the way light falls across a worn stone floor during an ordinary morning walk, the mindful rhythm of washing simple dishes. These mundane actions are not merely filler between grand events. They are meditative acts of philosophical resistance. They ground us when the imagination threatens to lift us away on the wings of catastrophic what-ifs. The discipline found in routine becomes a shield against the drama of excess. The ancient wisdom urges us toward acknowledging this quiet, radical power we possess, the ability to choose our internal reaction. This realization is both empowering and deeply terrifying, because if we can choose our response, then nothing that happens to us, the sudden failure, the unkind word, the inevitable suffering, can ever truly surprise us or genuinely derail us. They are merely stimuli, raw data points for the soul's ongoing education. It means learning the arduous art of the inner dialogue. When fear speaks, it is loud and dramatic, painting pictures of catastrophe. It whispers that you deserve to suffer, or that disaster is imminent. Philosophy teaches you to treat these fearful thoughts not as facts, but merely as hypotheses, thoughts that require rigorous questioning. You must argue with your own mind, gently dismantling the exaggerated narratives of panic until only cool reason remains in its place. The conclusion we draw from this confrontation between epic story and measured thought is profound. True heroism is not found when you wield a God-given weapon against a monster. It is found in the quiet moment when you refuse to let an external event dictate your internal peace. It is the steadfast commitment to treating reality, in its messy, unedited complexity, with unwavering acceptance, while never ceasing to question the story that both history and our own passions have written for us. The ancient stories we are told are breathtaking. They paint worlds of roaring gods and epic battles, where fate is a tapestry woven by hands far greater than man's own. We accept them as truth, the way the thunder rolls, the how heroes rise from impossible odds. But what if those narratives offer only half the story? What if they mistake the magnificent show for profound understanding? The stories of myth are compelling because they promise external resolution. They tell us that our meaning is written upon us by a divine hand, waiting to be fulfilled through glorious struggle or tragic destiny. We live under the illusion that joy must come from conquering mountains or slaying monsters. Consider this simple riddle. Does fate decide everything, or do we choose how we respond? Mythic thought often answers with certainty. Fate is fixed. Yet, philosophy gently challenges that premise. It asks us to step away from the spectacular drama and look instead at the quiet space between an event and our reaction to it. This gap, this moment of choice, is where human freedom resides. The hero in myth must overcome external forces, a jealous god, a mighty beast. The philosopher, however, argues that the most formidable foe we face does not wear armor or wield a spear. It wears the mask of assumption, and it lives within our own minds. We are taught to fear the unpredictable storm, the sudden betrayal, the crushing weight of failure because these events feel entirely outside our control. Our natural human instinct is to seek an omnipotent force, be it destiny or some cosmic plan, to explain why suffering happens. We want a neat explanation, a clear culprit for the pain. But philosophy suggests that searching too desperately for the grand cosmic why often leads only to intellectual paralysis. It traps us in endlessly debated systems of causality. Instead, we must learn a subtler form of mastery, the mastery over our own inner dialogue. The mind is the battlefield where most suffering originates. When panic strikes, when fear demands immediate action and assumes a single catastrophic future, it is not fate that is making the judgment. It is the unexamined narrative running through our own thoughts. The myth teaches us to face the physical threat with valor. Philosophy teaches us to face the internal scream of anxiety with discipline. This shift in focus changes everything. True courage is therefore redefined. It is no longer the ability to stand before an army and not flinch. It is the quiet, difficult decision made when nothing is watching. The choice to acknowledge a painful thought without becoming it. The commitment to remain rational even when emotional impulses scream for despair. Our lives are built on routines. From rising with the dawn to completing the simple task of washing dishes or walking through a familiar park, these mundane acts often become highly philosophical. They provide small islands of control in a vast ocean of unpredictable change. When we focus our full attention, what the ancients called mindfulness, on the feel of water, the weight of a stone, the rhythm of our breath, we practice a deep form of self-discipline. These routines are not mere time fillers. They are meditative acts that tether us back to the present moment, pulling us out of the destructive cycle of if only or what if. The profound challenge is accepting radical uncertainty. Myth tends to provide comforting boundaries. Follow these rules, perform this ritual, defeat that enemy, and you will be safe. Philosophy suggests a wider world, a place where absolute certainty is itself an illusion. We must learn to live not only with the unpredictable storm of loss, but also with the unbearable discomfort of ambiguity. To lose something cherished, the stability of a career, the unwavering presence of a loved one, is terrifying because our entire self-worth often feels wrapped up in external nouns. The object, the role, the relationship. But what if those things are merely mirrors reflecting value back to us? What if the fundamental source of worth is internal and entirely within our control? This realization forces us into a profound state of vulnerability. We must confront thoughts that feel overwhelming, thoughts so dense with complexity or pain that they threaten to crush us under their weight. At times, simply holding these ideas, the contradiction between free will and natural law, the meaning of suffering, feels deeply isolating. It is exhausting to constantly challenge one's own deepest assumptions. The sheer weight of knowing too much can be a greater burden than ignorance. Yet this struggle with complexity leads us toward clearer truths. We begin to argue with ourselves, not in shouting matches of despair, but in quiet, reasoned debates. When the fear screams that we are inadequate, the rational mind must respond by tracing the flaw in that thought, by remembering past instances where perceived failure did not equate to permanent ruin. This is cognitive restructuring. It is giving intellectual discipline to our emotional life. We learn to separate the raw, panicked emotion from the considered truth. The shift then becomes observable in how we interact with others. The old way, the mythic response, is immediate and dramatic. A slight perceived insult causes a defensive volley of harsh words, a theatrical withdrawal, or an explosive defense of self-image. It is a reaction driven by ego and the belief that one's worth must be protected at all costs. But the philosophical path demands patience. It requires measuring the moment, pausing before speaking, considering the true meaning behind the perceived offense. By choosing calm, measured response over reactive drama, we find that small moments of restraint possess an immense power to shift a large, spiraling conflict into manageable conversation. This is not weakness. It is supreme self-control. The greatest illusion, perhaps, is the myth of external validation. We are constantly seeking affirmation, the praise from a mentor, the approval of a friend, the nod of society that tells us we are enough. We build our internal structure hoping that if enough outside people agree with us or grant us status, then finally we will feel whole. But this creates a terrifying dependency, making our peace fragile and subject to external whims. The philosopher insists that genuine contentment must be self-generated. It must spring from the realization of one's own capacity for virtue, independent of applause or circumstance. Happiness, it turns out, is not something found. It is something built from within. This journey culminates in acceptance. We are introduced to Amor Fati, a powerful concept, the love of fate. It is not merely passive endurance. It is an active embracing of everything that happens, even what hurts, even what defies logic, and especially the moments we would rather change. Instead of fighting the reality of failure or battling the inescapable imperfection of another person, we learn to say yes to it all. This acceptance transforms us from victims reacting to fate into protagonists who own their complete experience. We do not simply survive life, we incorporate it wholly. This philosophy also guides us toward radical simplicity. When we look at our lives and find them cluttered with excessive possessions, accumulated grudges, unnecessary ambitions, we begin the process of stripping away that mental and physical clutter. Minimalism becomes a spiritual act. It teaches us to distinguish between what is truly necessary for human flourishing and what merely seems valuable because society has deemed it so. Freedom blossoms when our need diminishes, and this disciplined approach eventually leads us back to the smallest acts of courage, the decisions that require no grand fanfare, no sword fight, no dramatic rescue. Speaking a difficult truth with gentle clarity, admitting a mistake simply and sincerely, choosing patience over explosive anger in a moment of frustration. These small choices demand more internal bravery than any physical confrontation, because they challenge the deeply ingrained narratives we tell ourselves about who we are allowed to be. The ultimate realization is that this mastery does not equate to becoming superhuman, nor does it mean abandoning our humanity. True heroism, the final insight, lies in reconciling the epic mythic struggle with the quiet human reality. We are meant to be both, capable of passionate depth and stoic resilience. Our greatest battleground is always within the confines of self. The highest calling is simply the art of mastering ourselves. This understanding brings us to a profound and peaceful conclusion. This journey is not a destination marked by triumphant banners or permanent peace. It is the realization that the philosophy, like life itself, is unfinished. We are always learning how to respond better, how to accept deeper, how to inhabit the ambiguity with dignity. Overlooking a vast expanse, be it ocean or mountains, we grasp that our self is not a finished statue of perfect virtue, but rather a river in constant flow. The wisdom we gain today prepares us for the challenges of tomorrow, forever reminding us that life itself is the greatest, most enduring narrative, and the story never truly ends. The knowledge we acquire, the truths we uncover, are a beautiful and terrifying burden. When the world is painted in vibrant myths, everything has a place, a grand narrative thread pulling all actions into a clear pattern. The heroes rise to meet destiny. They struggle against gods or monstrous forces, and the outcome often feels predetermined by some cosmic law. But philosophy shows us that the real struggles are not fought on distant battlefields, but here, within the echoing chambers of our own minds. And when we peel back the layers of narrative, when we understand the mechanics of how thoughts operate, we discover a vast landscape of uncomfortable facts. This deep seeing is isolating. It is a quiet weight, unlike the drama of a heroic fall or an epic victory. The world continues its daily rhythm, indifferent to our intellectual awakening. People speak in comforting certainties, relying on stories and simple categorizations that make life feel manageable. They need their fate to be fixed, for predictability brings comfort, even if that certainty is merely an illusion. To stand outside that easy belief, armed with complex understanding, feels like standing alone atop a high hill, looking down at the river of conventional thought flowing below you. The philosopher begins to realize the profound loneliness of this state. The burden of knowing too much knowledge means seeing the patterns in suffering that others are blind to. It means understanding that joy is never permanent and sorrow is rarely absolute. It implies a continuous vigilance against the gentle pull toward accepting what is merely convenient rather than what is fundamentally true. This overknowing can become paralyzing. If we understand how much of our life is dictated by chemical fluctuations, by ingrained societal expectations, or simply by random chance, then where does free will reside? It seems to dissolve into a mist of statistical probability and biological imperative. This intellectual vertigo, this feeling that the foundation of existence might be nothing more than carefully constructed consensus, is perhaps the greatest struggle of all. The instinct is to retreat to simpler myths, to accept explanations that satisfy without demanding truth. We crave the neat enclosure of cause and effect. We want to know which God governs our career success, or which virtue guarantees lasting love. Philosophy offers no such comforting map. Instead, it hands us an immense scroll filled with paradoxes, requiring us to build our own meaning from the raw material of reality. The pressure builds not from external enemies, but from internal contradictions. We understand that the desire for validation is fundamentally a fragile construct, built upon other people's subjective agreement. This realization is like staring into a funhouse mirror and seeing every flattering reflection distorted and mocking. It is unbearable. The mind struggles to reconcile the need to belong, a deep, primal urge, with the understanding that genuine peace must be internally generated, autonomously cultivated. One begins to see the inherent flaw in grand systems of belief. They tend to place ultimate responsibility for happiness outside the self, with fortune, with divine favor, or with some perfect societal structure. But the philosopher learns, through painstaking introspection, that this external locus of control is a beautiful but lethal myth. True peace is not granted. It must be legislated into existence by one's own disciplined attention. This deep internal labor requires dismantling cherished certainties. It means questioning deeply held values, the value of reputation, the necessity of accumulation, the weight of unspoken obligation. Each question is a small excavation, digging up beliefs that were previously deemed too comfortable to challenge. The process is grueling. It is exhausting because it demands that we remain perpetually skeptical of our own deepest desires and most cherished assumptions. The knowledge gained isn't merely intellectual. It fundamentally alters the way one perceives time itself. Time ceases to be a straight, relentless arrow moving towards an inevitable end. Instead, it becomes a flexible medium for attention. The future is seen less as a series of looming threats and more as a canvas upon which only our present attitude can truly paint. This shift is immense. It moves the burden of meaning from foretelling to experiencing. And so we learn that the ultimate knowledge, the terrifyingly liberating realization, is that suffering often arises not from the event itself, but from our desperate resistance to what simply is. The desire for life to be simpler, cleaner, more predictable than it actually is, that resistance is the true burden. To accept this imperfection, to embrace ambiguity without collapsing into despair, that is the beginning of freedom. It is in this space of overwhelming understanding and fragile peace that the journey truly begins. We are no longer merely seeking answers from an external oracle or a glorious narrative. We are learning how to inhabit the questions themselves. This ongoing discipline, this radical acceptance of cognitive dissonance, becomes our sole and most profound undertaking. The great myths may provide spectacular images, but they offer only dazzling distractions. Philosophy demands a quieter, tougher kind of heroism, the relentless, humble work of becoming one's own surest guide. After wrestling with the overwhelming weight of vast truths and boundless concepts, perhaps our minds often seek a form of sanctuary. We look to the monumental events, the great turning points, the crises that shatter routine, believing that profound insights only appear when life is at its most dramatic. But the philosopher understands something quieter, more subtle, and ultimately more powerful. He recognizes that true mental freedom does not emerge from a spectacular revelation. It settles into the steady rhythm of the day-to-day. The journey toward self-mastery might tempt us to believe we must first survive an apocalypse or overcome a monstrous challenge before we are worthy of peace. Yet, our quiet mornings teach us that wisdom wears the guise of the ordinary. The simple act of washing dishes, the measured pace of a walk through an unfamiliar neighborhood, these mundane repetitions cease to be mere background noise. They become, instead, philosophical acts. Consider the discipline of a morning routine. It is predictable. The coffee maker whirs in the same cadence every day. The toothbrush meets the enamel with a reliable circular motion. This predictability, which might feel restrictive to the restless spirit, is actually a powerful tool for mental training. Each repetition offers an opportunity, a small, unnoticed window, to practice deep presence. It demands nothing of us but our full attention. The mind, forever seeking the next great intellectual breakthrough or the dramatic emotional peak, can often remain adrift during these simple moments. It might drag us back into worrying about yesterday's failures or speculating endlessly about tomorrow's uncertainties. But here, in the quiet routine, we are forced to confront our wandering minds. We learn a gentle form of mental resistance. When your focus is narrowed down to the physical task at hand, the careful placement of soap suds, the feeling of cool water on tired skin, the vastness of existence suddenly feels less threatening. The overwhelming concepts that once felt like crushing monoliths of thought begin to shrink down to fit within the manageable scope of a single action. We are not solving riddles about fate. We are simply rinsing away plate residue. The paradox is this. In doing something utterly unchallenging, we actually challenge ourselves profoundly. We confront our own tendency toward intellectual escape. We find that if we can maintain perfect, calm focus while scrubbing stubborn grime, we possess the same latent capacity for patience when dealing with a difficult conversation or an unavoidable setback. The routine acts like a low-grade, perpetual meditation. It doesn't promise ultimate enlightenment. It only promises the steady effort of staying present. We train ourselves to inhabit the moment completely, to notice the scent of the damp air, the precise weight of the glass, the subtle shift in temperature on our wrists. These are micro-lessons in acceptance. We start to dismantle the mythic idea that significance must be loud and bloody. The greatest acts of inner strength do not roar from battlefields, they whisper from kitchen sinks. They reside in the commitment to doing what needs to be done, calmly and thoroughly, regardless of immediate emotional reward or public recognition. The philosopher shows us how these simple actions become anchors. When life presents a crisis, a professional failure, a personal disappointment, an unavoidable loss, the memory of that quiet morning walk returns. It is the reminder that we have trained ourselves to be masters of small moments. We realize that if we can withstand the tedium and distraction of rinsing cereal bowls, we have the mental scaffolding required to handle true emotional upheaval. The internal struggle shifts from the grandiose question of what am I destined for, to the manageable question of how will I respond right now. This shift is revolutionary. It grounds meaning not in external destiny or dramatic circumstance, but in disciplined participation. Every repetitive movement becomes an affirmation of personal agency. We are choosing to exist, moment by moment, through mindful action. And this quiet practice has profound consequences for how we view struggle. Failure, no longer seen as a catastrophic narrative and point predicted by the gods or fate, is merely a missed rhythm, a dish left unswept, a knot that needs retying. Uncertainty becomes less terrifying because we have developed trust in our own capacity for calm response. We learn to accept the unscripted nature of life, not with resignation, but with steady determination. The simple routine proves that contentment is often built brick by quiet brick, not through dramatic vaulting, leaps over chasms of misfortune. It teaches us to find dignity not just in facing down a raging army, but in simply showing up, day after tedious day, and treating the mundane act of life as if it were sacred. We have spent our time contemplating the grand narratives, the sweeping epics of gods and titans, filled with glorious battles and predetermined fates. We accepted that fate was a powerful force, an irresistible tide against which mortal will often seem futile. But we learned, slowly and painfully, that the myth is incomplete. It shows us the confrontation, but it never truly shows us where the real battle takes place. We were trained to look outward, for meaning in conquering enemies, for purpose in divine favor, or for happiness promised by success. We assumed that if only we could change the external world, if only we could defeat the storm, secure the reward, or survive the devastating loss, then peace would follow. This is the siren song of myth, that stability and joy are found beyond us. But our journey has forced us to pull back, tracing the lines of causality until they led not toward Olympus, but into the silent space between a breath in and a breath out. The true challenge, we realize now, is not external. It lies here, within the architecture of our own minds. The lesson of fate was profound. Acceptance matters. We learn to embrace what was, even when it brought suffering, finding strength in the very grip of things that were outside our choice. But even accepting the unchangeable does not make us invincible against the terrifying possibility of change itself, the void into which everything flows. Consider now the storm. Not a sudden tempest we can prepare for with walls or armor, but an indefinite period of turbulence. The loss we contemplate is deeply valued, a connection to another person, a sense of professional identity, or perhaps the entire structure of a life built on specific certainties. When that anchor suddenly snaps, when the certainty dissolves into pure possibility, panic is the natural response. It demands external rescue. The mind, however, offers no such guarantee. We find ourselves adrift in a hypothetical scenario. What if the foundation we trusted suddenly crumbled? What if the source of our daily meaning vanished tomorrow? It is here, at the edge of this precipice, that the philosophical training becomes most urgently necessary. Our first instinct whispers chaos. Our emotions erupt into resistance to loss, resistance to uncertainty, and a desperate plea for things to return to how they were. We want the narrative restored. We demand the familiar villain reemerge, or the comforting plot twist that promises everything will be all right. But wisdom compels us toward stillness. We are forced into a deep, reflective contemplation. What is truly mine to control in this moment? The loss itself is not controllable. Time's passing is uncontrollable. The actions of others, beyond initial boundaries, belong to the chaotic stream of chance. They are all external variables. The only variable remaining, the last sanctuary against the tempest, is our immediate attitude. It is the filter through which we allow reality to pass. This simple realization is monumental. It shifts us from being characters shaped by circumstance to becoming architects of response. When the perceived loss threatens to dismantle who we are, when the title, the relationship, or the structure of our days feels ripped away, the sheer power of internal choice becomes breathtaking. We begin to see that suffering does not come directly from the event itself. It is the story we tell ourselves about that event. It is the desperate insistence that this cannot happen which creates emotional paralysis. The practice, therefore, must be constant vigilance against this narrative tendency. We must pause before reacting. We must allow the raw data of reality to enter, the fact of absence, the quiet moment of suspension, without immediately applying the judgment of grief or despair. This deliberate space is where freedom resides. If we accept that there are mountains on the horizon which may never materialize, and valleys which might close forever, our strength must derive from an unshakable belief in our own internal fortitude. We train ourselves to treat life's inevitable shocks not as disasters deserving emotional collapse, but as training grounds for inner resilience. Each setback becomes a chance to practice the sacred skill, the self-directed redirection of panic into purposeful observation. It is a discipline that demands radical humility. We must surrender the comforting illusion of predictability. We must become comfortable with the maybe and the perhaps. This intellectual discomfort, this feeling of being unanchored by certainty, was once unbearable. Now, we start to see it as pure freedom. We are no longer seeking a dramatic rescue or a final answer handed down from the heavens. The goal has refined itself into something quieter, more profound: self-mastery. Not merely controlling anger or desire, but mastering the very framework of expectation. It means understanding that the life you live is not determined by what happens to you, but by how you choose to perceive and process every single thing that does happen. This realization demands an ongoing commitment. There will be days when the wind howls so loud we forget this lesson. Moments when the familiar weight of attachment drags us back into the myths. the myth of deserved reward, the myth of ultimate safety. But we must return always to the center, knowing that though the storm may rage around us, raging through our possessions or relationships, the sovereign domain, the small, quiet island that no external force can touch, is the space of our disciplined will and acceptance. To face the uncontrollable storm is not to magically prevent the winds. It is simply to refuse to let the winds dictate the architecture of your soul. It is the profound act of drawing strength from nothing more complex than one's own reasoned presence in the present moment. We have spent time looking at the great stories, the grand cycles of myth. We watched heroes face impossible battles and gods wield uncontrollable power. These myths give us a thrilling sense of purpose, suggesting that meaning comes from outside, from destiny, from divine favor, or from defeating an enemy visible in the epic landscape. But we also learned something far more challenging, far less dramatic, that true human strength is not measured by the sword raised against an external foe. It is found within the quiet discipline of the mind. We have seen that life presents us with unavoidable storms, the loss of what we cherish, the sudden shift in fortune, the dismantling of certainties. In those moments, the mythic narrative offers little comfort because it insists on some predictable outcome. Philosophy, by contrast, forces us to confront a stark and unsettling freedom. We cannot control the storm, but we are absolutely responsible for how we sail through it. The battleground is no longer across the sea. It resides here, within the space between an event happening and our response to it. This realization brings us to what might be called the art of inner dialogue, the private conversation waged moment by moment inside the skull. It is a constant struggle against echoes of fear and doubt that are often mistaken for objective truth. These internal voices tend to escalate disaster, painting every setback as catastrophic, magnifying uncertainty into sheer panic. They feed on emotional reaction, demanding immediate, dramatic surrender to feeling. The process of philosophical self-mastery demands that we become ruthless editors of our own minds. We must learn not simply to observe these fearful thoughts, to note them like passing clouds, but to interrogate them. We must ask, is this thought factual? Is it based on evidence, or is it merely a habit of anxious expectation? This requires developing a philosophical skepticism toward even our most cherished internal narrative. Imagine the mind as a vast marketplace at dusk. Every sudden anxiety, every flash of regret, every unwarranted accusation against the future all present themselves here, shouted out with confidence and urgency. If we accept them as truth, they become reality. But if we treat them as mere commodities for sale, merely opinions that can be examined and dismissed, then they lose their power. To argue against our own fear is not an act of forceful denial. It is an act of reasoned clarity. When a thought whispers, "You cannot handle this loss," the inner dialogue must gently counter with, "Perhaps I can only manage what is immediately in front of me, and that small space is manageable." It shifts the focus from the overwhelming magnitude of the potential problem to the precise physicality of the current moment. The goal here is cognitive restructuring. We are not attempting to empty the mind of difficult emotions. We know they belong to us and must be acknowledged. Instead, we aim to change our relationship with them. We move from identifying with the feeling, believing I am failure when a mistake happens, to simply recognizing it. A sensation of failure has arisen. This subtle linguistic shift creates crucial emotional distance. Furthermore, this inner discipline is profoundly connected to routine and acceptance. Just as our morning walk taught us that wisdom resides in simple repetition, The self-examination teaches us that tranquility lives in measured thought. When we repeatedly train ourselves to question a fear, or to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth without spiraling into drama, we are building mental muscle. This resilience is portable. It can be applied whether facing the profound emptiness of loss or simply waiting for bad news. The struggle with inner dialogue reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external events themselves, but from the story we tell ourselves about those events before they even happen. We build elaborate scaffolds of expectation, expecting joy to last forever, expecting approval to be guaranteed, expecting stability never to waver. When reality inevitably proves messy and unpredictable, our carefully constructed narratives collapse, leading to emotional shock. To master this inner dialogue is therefore the ultimate act of self-sovereignty. It means deciding that even if fate throws the worst possible scenario at us, the loss of all comforts, the rejection by everyone we love, our core values and our method of responding will remain untouched by external forces. This commitment to internal resilience becomes a sanctuary. The mind is made free not when it is emptied, but when its owner understands how to command it. It learns that while life presents us with boundless unpredictability, our ability to assent to reality, to accept what is given, this remains the last citadel of human freedom and worth the deepest philosophical exploration. The narratives we consume are often loud. They demand our total surrender. We are taught to view life through the lens of monumental drama, of epic triumphs, catastrophic falls, and inescapable fate handed down by gods or destiny itself. These grand stories paint a world where meaning is found in external forces. The clash of armies, the curse of an immortal lover, the sudden benevolence of fortune's wheel. We become accustomed to waiting for that singular moment, that thunderclap revelation, that decisive outside action which will finally grant us peace or victory. It feels natural to believe that our life is merely a series of spectacular responses to fate. But what if the greatest stories are not those written in bronze on heroic monuments? What if they are written in silence? The mythic mind looks outward. It demands justification from the world around us for why we feel incomplete or why something has gone wrong. It seeks meaning in the grand, sweeping plot. Yet philosophy asks a radical question. Does our response have to be dictated by what happens to us? This shift is perhaps the most daunting intellectual hurdle of all, moving from being the character acted upon to realizing oneself as the primary source of action and even reaction. We spend so much energy trying to predict the villain's next move or appease the whim of a capricious divine power that we forget the one thing within our immediate grasp, the space between stimulus and response. That small, luminous interval is where all freedom resides. To master this internal pause is nothing short of self-sovereignty. It means acknowledging that while many elements of life, the weather, the actions of others, the global economy, are inherently outside the boundary of our will, the interpretation we apply to those events remains ours alone. This quiet recognition can feel unsettling, almost irresponsible. It strips away the comforting predictability of a clear mythological structure, where good always fights evil and destiny eventually pays its due. Instead, it forces us into the gritty reality of cognitive discipline. We begin to realize that many of our deepest struggles are not against external foes, but against internal narratives. The constant stream of self-doubt, the anticipatory dread, the seductive temptation to assign blame or guilt when things merely feel difficult. The philosophical journey thus becomes a relentless practice in deconstruction. It is about treating every emotionally charged thought as a hypothesis, worthy only of rigorous skepticism, rather than accepting it as incontrovertible truth. We are learning to separate raw sensation from weighted judgment. For example, the simple act of arriving late for an appointment might trigger a cascade of catastrophic self-recrimination. The mythic mind immediately shouts, "You are unreliable, you are flawed, and this confirms your worthlessness." The philosophical practice demands a pause. It asks, what evidence do I have to support that grand accusation? Is my perceived flaw truly permanent? Or is it just an immediate emotional surge interpreting temporary failure? This shift transforms the weight of experience from something defining our identity into merely information we must process and file away. We are retraining the mind to stop running headlong toward dramatic reaction and instead moving with the measured gait of thoughtful deliberation. It requires a profound patience that often clashes sharply with our natural, impatient desire for immediate resolution or external validation. To be truly philosophical is to accept ambiguity not as a failure of knowledge, but as the very source of freedom. The world does not always offer clean answers. Sometimes the most important truth is simply the acknowledgement of what we do not yet know, and the courage required to live within that beautiful uncertainty. We must stop looking for grand signposts or epic confirmations and start finding profound depth in the monotonous rhythm of persistence. This quiet work, the daily refusal to be swept away by emotional currents, is more demanding than any battle on a battlefield. It is emotionally exhausting because it requires us to fundamentally change how we process reality itself. We are learning that emotional stability is not achieved by removing stressors, but by building an unshakable internal structure strong enough to withstand them. This involves the constant refinement of our inner dialogue, recognizing those patterns where we speak harshly to ourselves or make excuses for others simply because it feels easier than facing objective truth. The whispers of fear are incredibly convincing, painting detailed pictures of worst-case scenarios that have never occurred and establishing a perceived necessity for immediate panic. But philosophy provides a steady voice of reason, one that insists on considering alternatives. What if this difficulty is not a permanent flaw, but simply a current passage? This transition from reactive existence to deliberate living is the ultimate mastery. We are not seeking some grand philosophical epiphany delivered in a flash of lightning. We are cultivating the quiet, unwavering discipline of showing up for our own minds, day after day. Our goal becomes less about achieving perfect happiness, a concept itself often built on external expectations, and more about developing profound resilience. It is building an inner architecture so robust that life's inevitable blows simply reverberate off its walls, rather than causing structural collapse. We are transforming from people who seek meaning to those who generate it through disciplined attention, thoughtful choice, and the unwavering commitment to self-correction. This realization doesn't offer a neat, satisfying conclusion. On the contrary, it reveals that life itself is an unending text, requiring continuous reading, revision, and deeper understanding. The heroism is not found in defeating a monster. It is found in mastering the complex geography of one's own heart and mind. It is this ongoing commitment to intellectual humility and emotional resilience that defines the philosophical spirit. We have spent time believing that our worth is somehow measured by the applause of others. We assume that if we are good enough, worthy enough, or simply successful enough, then external recognition will follow. This belief is a powerful comfort, an emotional safety net woven from societal expectation and inherited need. But it is also a profoundly fragile illusion. It makes us creatures of perpetual seeking, forever looking outward for the signal that says, "You belong, you are acceptable, you are enough." Our minds, by default, are machines built to seek validation. We crave positive reinforcement, the compliment, the promotion, the perfect relationship status, the nod of approval from a perceived superior. In our quest for this external mirror's reflection, we often sacrifice our internal compass. We begin tailoring our truth, softening our convictions, or even acting against our deepest values, just to achieve that coveted feeling of belonging. It is a transaction where we trade the integrity of the self for the warmth of temporary acceptance. The wisdom we are seeking suggests an entirely different calculus for human well-being. It posits that the deep, settled peace does not reside in the hands of another person, nor does it spring from the unpredictable tides of fortune or fame. Instead, true grounding must be excavated from within. If our foundation rests on shifting sands, the moods of others, the fluctuating economy, or the praise of a crowd, then inevitable instability will always threaten to pull us under. Think about the nature of approval itself. When someone applauds us, it is merely an echo. It has no inherent sustaining power. It exists only in that moment and can vanish with the next glance. To build our self-esteem upon echoes is to condemn ourselves to a life lived in constant, anxious anticipation of judgment. We become slaves to the gaze, perpetually adjusting our performance for an invisible audience. The realization arrives slowly, like the dawn breaking after a long, confusing night. The moment we accept that nobody else holds the master key to our inherent value, the tension begins to ease from our shoulders. The urgent need to perform, to prove ourselves over and over again, begins to fade into background noise. This detachment is not apathy, it is self-possession. It is recognizing where your power actually lies. Your power does not come from controlling other people's perception of you. It comes from the quiet covenant you make with yourself, that no matter what others think or whether they see you at all, you are maintaining a core standard of integrity and respect for your own being. The psychological burden of seeking validation is immense. Every rejection feels like a personal failure. Every compliment feels like temporary grace. It ties our sense of self-worth to the unpredictable actions and fickle goodwill of others. This dependency leaves us tragically vulnerable to betrayal, disappointment, and comparison, the thief of joy. To reclaim inner sovereignty means practicing radical emotional self-reliance. It requires looking at the need for external praise not as a fatal flaw, but as an understandable habit, a learned defense mechanism acquired during childhood or cultural conditioning. We must gently observe it, acknowledge its persistence, and then refuse to grant it ultimate authority over our feelings. We are teaching ourselves that merely existing with genuine effort and kindness is sufficient justification. The true measure of character shifts profoundly in this understanding. A person validated by others may be dazzlingly charismatic, achieving great public success. But the truly self-validated individual possesses a quiet, unwavering resilience. Their worth is constant, like the steady orbit of a planet. It does not change when the bright stars momentarily shift their position or dim their light. Consider the moments when you feel most invisible or disregarded. In those small, unacknowledged instances, your inner dialogue is tested. Do you spiral into self-doubt, demanding recognition? Or do you treat the lack of acknowledgement as neutral data, simply a fact about an interaction that occurred, requiring no emotional reaction from you? This subtle shift in interpretation is where genuine freedom resides. This transition marks the difficult journey from needing to be seen to simply being visible. We must learn to derive meaning from the process of living itself, from the disciplined morning walk, from the painstaking act of washing dishes, from grappling with a complex idea, not from the grand payoff that promises eternal reward. We are not meant to live in the anticipation of praise. We are meant to practice virtue moment by moment. The applause of others is a delightful bonus, perhaps, but it can never be the fundamental source of joy or self-respect. That job belongs only to the disciplined self, requiring nothing but consistent effort and ethical conduct. The greatest heroism, therefore, remains not conquering the external world, but mastering the internal contract. The decision to value yourself based on your adherence to principle, regardless of whether anyone else notices it. This act of radical self-acceptance is the ultimate rejection of illusion and the truest form of power. We have spent so long looking for meaning outside ourselves. We sought it in the thunderous pronouncements of destiny, in the sweeping epics of gods and giants, or in the unpredictable turbulence of fortune. We believed that a grand, transformative event, a victory on the battlefield, an epic embrace, or even the profound loss of everything we cherish, would finally grant us understanding. Yet, every time we found a source for our salvation outside of ourselves, the moment proved fragile, and the resulting peace was always conditional. The philosopher showed us that external success is merely borrowed glory. It shifts, it fades, and it leaves us exposed to the same fundamental anxieties: fear, uncertainty, and disappointment. We spent so much energy fighting what was happening around us, resisting every blow of circumstance, only to discover that resistance itself is a source of profound suffering. This journey forces us toward an unsettling realization. The greatest struggle is not against fate or men, but with our own attachment to how things should be. We are constantly battling imagined futures and idealized pasts, creating narratives of loss even before anything has actually changed. This internal war drains a monumental amount of emotional energy. The final frontier of self-mastery demands something far more radical than simple acceptance. Though it begins there, it asks us to go beyond merely enduring what happens. It calls for an active embrace of everything that is. This profound commitment is the principle known as Amor Fati. It means not just tolerating fate, but genuinely loving it. Loving it even when it is cruel, confusing, or utterly underwhelming. The early concept taught us to choose our response. We learned that we are free in the space between stimulus and action. But Amor Fati deepens this freedom into a comprehensive commitment. It suggests that every moment, every mistake, every painful failure must be seen not as an obstacle blocking us from a happier path, but as an absolute necessity making us precisely who we must become. The mythic story often requires a climax, a triumphant resolution where the hero defeats the monster and returns home to safety. Philosophy suggests that the true climax is simply choosing to live entirely within the unscripted moment, that all things that happen are necessary, forming a complete, perfect, if sometimes ugly, circle. Consider the unexpected setback, the irreversible change, or the deep disappointment of someone we cared for. The natural human reaction is to resist it, fighting against what is. We imagine a different reality where these events never occurred. This resistance creates emotional pain that often exceeds the pain of the event itself. Only by dismantling this resistance, by allowing ourselves to fully commit to the reality of the present moment, flaws and all, can we find genuine freedom. Amor Fati is not resignation, it is fierce participation. It is recognizing that if you truly loved every facet of your life, the successes, yes, but especially the failures. You cease to waste energy mourning what might have been differently. You become a collaborator with existence itself. The universe provides its sequence, and you provide the unwavering commitment to play your part, no matter how difficult the script. This love for fate cultivates an extraordinary form of mental resilience. When we treat every hardship, the unexpected loss, the harsh critique, the sheer pointlessness that sometimes permeates life, as a gift disguised as suffering, something shifts within us. We begin to see adversity not as a punishment imposed upon us, but as raw material given freely for the sake of practice. It is training ground for the self. The mythic hero survives because he possesses exceptional strength or divine favor. The philosophical human learns to thrive precisely because he recognizes that his greatest resource is his own disciplined mind, capable of reorganizing meaning from chaos. He does not wait for intervention. He becomes the agent of his own tranquility. This radical acceptance strips away the need for narrative completeness. Life rarely provides tidy arcs. It offers jagged edges, uncomfortable ambiguities, and moments where no single lesson seems to apply. And this is precisely where freedom resides, in embracing the incompleteness. The truth does not demand a neat bow on the end. It simply demands the continuous willingness to show up. The greatest myth killer, therefore, is not an external force or a perfect understanding of destiny. It is the inner voice that whispers, "This too shall pass," and furthermore, this passing moment was necessary, beautiful even in its difficulty. To accept fate is to finally put down the heavy burden of needing control, knowing instead that your power lies solely in the gravity and richness with which you live each passing second. It is a continuous shedding of narrative certainty for the quiet strength of being present. This self-mastery, this deep commitment to the now, is not an achievement we reach. It is the rhythm of breathing, steady, unassuming, and forever necessary. We have traveled a long distance already, standing at the precipice between belief and understanding. We have seen how quickly we build our lives upon glittering, fragile things, on possessions that promise happiness, on titles that guarantee worth, on relationships that require constant performance just to sustain. And often, all this accumulation feels like safety, like armor against a harsh world. Yet, the more intensely we gather these external assurances, the heavier they become. They do not lighten our burden, they merely change its shape. The journey of philosophy has taught us that true freedom is never found by adding more things to our lives, but by subtracting what no longer serves our soul. This is the minimalism for the soul. It is not a mere aesthetic choice, nor a fashionable trend. It is an act of profound internal surgery, aimed at stripping away everything we have mistaken for necessity. The mental clutter, the emotional debts, the expectations inherited from others. To become minimal in spirit means to cultivate a radical lightness. Consider the inner landscape itself. How much stuff do we carry inside our minds? We carry old narratives of shame, endless worries about things that might happen, and persistent arguments with versions of ourselves we wish we could erase. These are not thoughts. They are weights. They are imagined futures and forgotten pasts, weighing down the quiet capacity for simply being present. Minimalism begins by recognizing these mental burdens, acknowledging them without judgment, and gently setting them aside. The practical exercise is difficult because our society constantly whispers that having more means being better, or needing more means deserving more. We are conditioned to believe that lack equals suffering, but the ancient wisdom suggests the opposite. True fullness comes from a deliberate embrace of enough. This realization forces us into a profound confrontation with desire itself. Desire is not inherently evil. It is simply a pointer, an indicator pointing toward what we feel incomplete about. The minimalist spirit does not eradicate desire, but rather refines its focus. It asks, is this longing directed toward something that can truly change who I am? Or is it merely the echo of a void I haven't yet faced? To declutter our possessions was often viewed as a physical task, selling things, clearing shelves. But the deeper work involves the invisible objects, assumptions, habitual anxieties, and attachments to certain outcomes. To practice mental minimalism means questioning every single deeply held belief that claims absolute authority over your peace. When we begin to let go of these imagined attachments, something startling happens. We find a spaciousness. The space was always there, waiting beneath the layers of accumulation, the unused memories, the unexamined fears, the borrowed identities. This space is our true self, resilient and quiet, needing nothing external to validate its existence. This principle applies most powerfully when we look at relationships. We often accumulate emotional debts within those closest to us. We expect them to fulfill needs that are fundamentally ours to generate. The minimalist soul understands boundaries not as limitations on others, but as declarations of self-respect, an internal boundary defining where my peace begins and where the responsibilities of others end. The discipline required is immense. It demands radical indifference to appearances. You must be willing to stand alone in a quiet space, unadorned by praise or expectation, simply because being present with oneself is more valuable than any applause from the crowd. We are taught that struggle means fighting against resistance, fighting fate, fighting people, fighting our own bad moods. But the lesson of true minimalism teaches us to change the battleground entirely. Instead of stacking up defensive walls made of possessions and expectations, we learn to build a space of simple acknowledgement, to see what is, without immediately trying to fix it or acquire something more. This shedding of excess, of materialism, of emotional drama, of mental complexity, is not an end in itself. It is merely the necessary preparation. It is the clearing of the inner hearth so that when life's inevitable storms come, when the unavoidable losses strike, we are not caught unprepared and burdened by too much baggage. We hold only what is truly essential: our ability to observe, our capacity for kindness, and the simple freedom to choose our response, moment by measured moment. The ultimate minimalism is therefore a radical act of faith in one's own internal sovereignty. It is realizing that all worthiness stems from within. It does not need external decoration or monumental achievement to justify its existence. The profound emptiness we fear on the other side of letting go is, in fact, filled with limitless capacity for quiet joy and self-directed peace. This simple state, this elegant lack of requirement, is the highest form of human freedom. We have traveled far from the thunderous dramas of myth. We spent time contemplating grand struggles against destiny, battles against gods or fate itself. But we learned that true conflict is rarely fought with a sword. It happens quietly, in the space between our thoughts and our actions. The last lessons taught us that worth cannot be bought by achievement, nor earned through external praise. It must be built from within, brick by careful emotional brick. We practiced loving fate, not because it was comfortable, but because embracing its entirety showed us where our true power lay, in our consent to what is. Now, the teachings consolidate into a singular question of courage. Not the dramatic life-or-death gallop of heroes charging the enemy lines, but something far more subtle, far harder to achieve. The courage required for the small decision. Consider the moment when you must speak a difficult truth to someone whose feelings are fragile. The argument in your mind is complex. How do you defend your integrity while minimizing the pain you might inflict? A dramatic gesture feels insufficient. A loud outburst is too violent, betraying yourself and others. The optimal action requires mastery of tone, timing, and empathy, a quiet form of moral architecture. This is where philosophy demands a different kind of bravery. It asks us to face minor inconveniences, daily frictions, the small moments when our values are tested in plain sight. When we choose patience over quick anger, when we choose respectful disagreement over winning the argument simply because it feels satisfying, we are engaging in genuine heroism. The inner conflict is profound. We have trained ourselves to expect a high-stakes climax, a moment where everything changes. But life rarely gives us such spectacles of destiny. Instead, it presents us with repetitive choices. How should I respond to this slight? Should I stay silent when my conscience calls me out? Do I uphold the boundary I set for myself yesterday, even when today feels inconvenient? The weight of these small decisions is immense because they accumulate. Each single act of moral fortitude becomes a tiny anchor against the tide of careless indifference. They are miniature confirmations to the self. I am reliable. My principles matter more than temporary comfort. We must learn that our commitment to difficult, minor truths is what builds character, far more effectively than any grand sacrifice ever could. If we can be faithful in the mundane, in handling a small disagreement with grace, or admitting fault when it is easier to feign ignorance, we build an impenetrable inner fortress. The physical courage of myth is external and visible. I will confront the beast. The philosophical courage is internal and subtle. I will remain truthful even when my truth costs me something. This small act requires absolute self-sovereignty. It means separating your action from your emotional impulse. Your immediate, raw reaction, that defensive surge of indignation or hurt fear, is merely information, a chemical suggestion. The disciplined mind intervenes. It says, pause, observe the feeling without judgment. Then choose the response that aligns with who you truly intend to be. This is not about being constantly perfect. It is about developing consistent patterns of choice. It is practicing the muscle of measured response. You train your inner dialogue until arguing against an irrational fear feels as natural and effortless as breathing out a breath. We are always negotiating with our own narrative, the story we tell ourselves about who deserves kindness, who needs to be corrected, or what circumstances justify compromise. The goal is not simply self-control. It is radical alignment. It is making sure that the person you behave like today is consistently supported by the values you claimed yesterday. And this continuous practice reveals a profound truth. We are not meant to wait for life to present us with an epic stage. We are constantly on the stage of our own daily interactions, and every single interaction is a performance of self-mastery. To live well is simply to keep choosing difficult good over easy wrong. The culmination of these lessons leads us away from seeking final answers or eternal destination points. Philosophy reveals itself not as a finished monument built at the end of a syllabus, but as an endless path of careful walking. The deepest self-discovery does not happen during a moment of blinding revelation. It happens in the quiet endurance of routine virtue. It is in returning to simple tasks, the mindful dishes, the steady rhythm of the morning walk, and recognizing that discipline itself becomes its own reward and source of freedom. The ultimate hero, therefore, is simply the person who shows up every day, choosing thoughtfully, always correcting their response before it can damage them or others. This steady commitment to choice is the highest form of mastery. It means understanding that while we cannot control the storms outside, they are merely opportunities to practice our unshakable inner calm. And in mastering ourselves, we finally move beyond the need for validation from gods, society, or even fortune itself. We find sufficiency in the disciplined heart. We have spent chapters examining the grand narratives of myth and the quiet wisdom found in philosophy. We began by admiring the spectacular heroes, the figures who wrestled with gods, battled monstrous foes, and achieved fate-altering victories. Their lives were defined by external conflict, by massive, dramatic events that irrevocably shaped their world. But what if those great tales, while inspiring, only gave us half the story? They showed us how people reacted when everything was on the line, victory or absolute ruin. They depicted moments of divine intervention and epic struggle against overwhelming power. Yet, in retelling these mythic epics, we often miss the quiet engine room of human experience, the place where true meaning is forged, not by external pressure, but by internal choice. Our journey into philosophy has continually pulled us away from this magnificent illusion of destiny, controlled solely by gods or fate. We learned that true power does not reside in the sword arm, nor in divine favor, but within the space between a stimulus and our response. This simple gap, this momentary pause of conscious choice, became revealed as the single most potent human faculty. It is here, in that quiet instant of self-awareness, that we become radically free. The previous chapters were marked by dismantling external dependencies. We unlearned the need for validation from others, recognizing that basing our worth on the fickle approval of a crowd is an exhausting and brittle foundation. We practiced living through radical acceptance, the difficult art of Amor Fati, not just enduring what happens, but actively loving it, understanding that every setback, every difficulty, is not merely something to be survived, but material required for one's very being to develop. This commitment shifted our understanding of strength from martial prowess to steadfast endurance. Then came the revelations about simplicity, minimalism not just of possessions, but of the mind. We learned to declutter the mental junk drawer, the old assumptions, the inherited anxieties, the unaddressed emotional debts we carry like phantom luggage. To be mentally minimal was to create a spaciousness within oneself, a profound indifference that allowed us to face reality as it is, stripped bare and unfiltered by expectation or fear. And in its small acts of courage, we found the pattern. We saw that achieving self-sovereignty was not accomplished in one grand, dramatic gesture. It did not require slaying a physical beast. Instead, it required the consistent, quiet moral bravery to make difficult choices when no one is watching. The choice to speak an inconvenient truth with kindness. The choice to maintain integrity even when lying would be easier. These small acts of discipline, these daily alignments of will and principle, were revealed as the foundational pillars of a truly free life. So, we stand now at this critical point, standing between the towering scaffolds of myth and the quiet bedrock of philosophy. The hero in the myths was often someone who reacted perfectly to an unprecedented crisis, the man who stood against overwhelming odds until destiny shifted. But what about the human? What is the true measure of a deeply lived life? Is it defined by the peaks of victory, or by the sustained rhythm of daily effort? The reconciliation that awaits us is profound. The greatest challenge faced by humanity is not found in confronting external monsters. It is found in navigating the unpredictable landscape of one's own internal self. The hero and the human are asking for the same thing, yet their definition of strength differs wildly. Mythic heroism suggests mastery over the world. Philosophical heroism insists on mastery over the self. The weight of this realization can be daunting. To shift from believing that salvation comes from a glorious external event, a prophecy fulfilled, an enemy conquered, a God's favor granted, to realizing that salvation must always come from within, is to bear a tremendous intellectual burden. It forces us to confront the radical possibility that there is no guarantee of perfect outcomes. Life remains inherently messy, ambiguous, and fundamentally unpredictable. This is where the philosophical path demands not merely acceptance, but continuous active participation in one's own becoming. True self-mastery is an endless negotiation, a daily dialogue with our most resistant impulses. It means viewing our thoughts not as immutable truths revealed by some cosmic force, but rather as mere hypotheses, suggestions that deserve rigorous questioning. When panic arises, the mythic instinct is to react instantly and dramatically. The philosophical response is to pause, to observe the fear from a distance, and to question its necessity. The human being, therefore, must become its own chief editor. We must learn to challenge our automatic negative responses, the tendency to spiral into self-pity or out of control towards others. This inner work requires the same dedication once given to physical training or military discipline. It is a spiritual atheneum built day by day, through careful attention and disciplined choice. The great revelation, therefore, is that the pinnacle of human achievement, the highest form of heroism, is not achieving some perfect external state, such as eternal fame or absolute wealth. It is the quiet, unshakable commitment to one's own internal code. To act always in alignment with deeply held principles, even when those principles cost us popularity, convenience, or comfort. It means choosing dignity over fleeting pleasure, choosing reasoned response over emotional catharsis. The epic life is not necessarily the most dramatic life. Sometimes, the richest tapestry of existence is woven from thousands of seemingly unremarkable moments. The patience shown while waiting in line, the discipline maintained during a boring task, the kindness offered when one feels undeserving of it. The heroic journey, finally understood, is simply the journey back to oneself. It is the slow, deliberate process of becoming an autonomous agent, a person who answers for their own spirit. And this self-sovereignty is far more powerful than any crown or magic weapon could ever be. It is the ultimate triumph over the myth that life must always be spectacular, and the wisdom that quiet virtue can change the world just as mightily as a thunderclap. We have journeyed far from the great narratives of heroes and gods. We started by looking for meaning in external victories, believing that a life well lived was one marked by decisive physical battles or grand destiny. But as we moved deeper into this inquiry, we realized that the grand myths, however compelling they are, only ever provided a script, never a choice. They showed us what happened to great figures, but they could not teach us how to live when there is no crowd watching and no inevitable enemy knocking at the gates. We found ourselves at a strange point of reckoning. Having wrestled with fate, having embraced acceptance through Amor Fati, we learned that life does not offer neat conclusions. It refuses easy answers. We stripped away the notion of destination, the final victory, the perfect understanding, the ultimate realization, and what remained was simply time itself. Time stretching out before us, vast and indifferent, demanding only our presence. The philosophy, it seems, is less a mountain peak to be summited and more an open plain, a place where there are no guiding arrows pointing toward the end. It demands nothing of us but the commitment to continuous movement, the ongoing art of being oneself right now. This realization brought with it a peculiar peace, yet also a profound weight. The journey had revealed that the most sacred territory was not any far-off land or forgotten temple, but the self, exposed and naked under the midday sun. Here lived the unresolved chapter. This sense of unfinishedness was not a failure. It was perhaps the ultimate freedom. The mythic life always provided closure. The hero either succeeded in his quest or met a glorious demise. There was an ending that rang with absolute finality. But self-mastery, true human sovereignty, requires perpetual becoming. It means accepting that the work of building a resilient soul has no finish line. If we achieve perfect understanding, if we manage to silence every last lingering anxiety and fear, what then? Do we simply stop moving? The deep truth is that stasis is itself a form of failure. The mind, like the physical body, must remain engaged in practice. It must continue arguing with its own fears, questioning its assumptions, and refining its response to every triviality. The unexpected bill, the irritating conversation, the simple delay on a train. This is where the weightlessness sets in. Having shed the need for external validation, having embraced imperfection as strength, we arrive at the understanding that life is simply continuous calibration. We are never fully arrived. We are always aligning ourselves with reality itself. Our task is not to reach a fixed state of perfect peace, but to keep practicing the response that allows us to live with an ambiguity. The ocean stretches out before us now, infinite and boundless. The sky meets the water in a soft, blurred line, offering no easy demarcation between what is above and what is below. It mirrors this boundaryless nature of self-knowledge. Peace here is not the absence of waves. It is the capacity to observe them without being pulled under by their force. The most difficult habit to forge is therefore consistency itself. Not only in grand, dramatic moral decisions, but in the small, unremarkable moments that pass unobserved. The moment we choose patience instead of quick anger, the breath we take before answering a provocative question, the quiet commitment to simply observing our own thoughts without judging them. We learn to see these mundane acts as tiny philosophical victories. Each retained composure is evidence of sovereignty. Each gentle self-correction is proof of ongoing growth. We stop viewing philosophy as a body of texts or doctrines accumulated in an archive. Instead, it becomes the lived rhythm, the breathing that connects our immediate impulse with our measured response. And this rhythm never pauses. There are no final chapters for genuine human development. The enlightened life is one of perpetual becoming. It means living with the deep humility to know that even today, there is a lesson unlearned, an emotional habit yet untamed, and a perspective yet unexamined. So we do not conclude our journey with applause or epilogue. We simply commit ourselves to the walk, to the next sunrise, the next challenge, the next ordinary moment where choosing peace over panic becomes the most heroic act of all. This is the beauty and the burden of the self. It is a text that